Yo, football fans, and welcome to a different Tears episode on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in the Tears girl herself, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my content, UFC, Tears, football, NASCAR, baseball. Also, check out the Big D podcast for your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So joining us is as we like to say, the DK Tears girl, Megan Scoop. Is it Scoop or Shoop?
It's Shoup, actually. It's
Right.
it's like shout with a P.
It's Shoup.
Yes, yeah.
And don't forget the M in my last name, otherwise you're saying a curse word.
Got it.
So tell us about. So you are the DK Tears girl, correct?
Well, that's what's in my Twitter bio. That's what I'm trying to be. I love the Tears format, and there is just not enough content, out there about the Tears format. And I know Tears is, obviously for the Tears, contests are out there for all the different types of sports, as we were just talking about on DraftKings. But I specifically play a lot of the DraftKings Tears for NFL. And, I really, really enjoy the nuances of it. I enjoy that it's a different type of game, that you can use different type of strategies, and you don't have to do kind of the same thing that you do for Classic and Showdown. So, trying to put some more content out there for Tears.
So tell us about Tears, because we've seen giant contests for classic format where everybody stacks 150 lineups or for Showdown, but we haven't seen enough about Tears. Explain the Tears format for like football, baseball, basketball, or hockey.
Sure. I'll start with football first, because obviously that's the one I know the best. And, basically, and I think the other tiers or the other sports are a lot like this. You've got 8 tiers, and in NFL at least. And each tier, you're basically trying to pick the player that scores the most points, obviously. But you also want to dodge those floor plays, those guys that are getting obviously zeros or anything that are very low, because that'll really sink your lineup. So, but you're looking for those high upside, ceiling type plays, because you're trying to get the guy that scores the most in each tier. And the way DraftKings does it for NFL tiers is tier 1 and tier 5 are quarterbacks. Tier 1 is obviously like the upper echelon quarterbacks. Tier 5 is quarterbacks as well. Tiers 2, 3, and 4 are kind of like those stud running back receivers, and sometimes like a Kelsey, Mark Andrews, stud tight end. And then tiers, let's see, 6, 7, 8, that's where you're getting more into, maybe like a secondary running back, pass catching running back, more tight ends, and other receivers, but maybe not those guys that you can really count on week after week, like a, Cup or Devontae Adams. Those are the guys in the higher tier. So in tiers 6, 7, and 8, you've got guys that really have a much wider range of outcomes. So it really makes it interesting. But again, that's kind of how the tiers is laid out from tiers 1 through 8. And again, you were just looking for that player in each tier that scores the most points.
So it's not really more. So you're not really looking for safety. You want those high guys. So let's just say tier 1 for quarterbacks would probably be Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, maybe Lamar Jackson, something like that, right?
Yeah, yes, and the other kind of nuance is the first few tiers, like tier 1, 2, 3, and even 4, has less players, whereas tiers 5, the second group of quarterbacks, and 6 through 8 have more players. So obviously the ownership is going to get condensed more, and that's why you don't really stress about ownership as much in the earlier tiers, because it's going to get condensed more anyways. There's not going to be many sub like 10% owned guys, because there's only like usually 4 guys to choose from. Whereas in the later tiers, there's more like 8 guys to choose from. So ownership can get spread out. So that's another nuance to think about. But yes, to your point, there's about 4 quarterbacks in tier 1, and it's always those top guys. And yeah, you are looking for that, you're looking for the ceiling plays. But again, you do have to, watch out and make sure you don't step in a landmine and get hit with a floor play. Because, even if you kind of hit, let's say, 4 or 5 of the highest scores, and then you have 1 or 2 like floor plays in another tier, that can really hurt you. I mean, to the point where you certainly won't win or finish high in that contest, but you may not even cash if you take a couple like really, really low scores. So I like to think about tiers as you're definitely chasing the ceiling, but you're also trying to dodge the floor, if that makes sense.
So, for instance, I'm trying to think what would be a high floor play? Would a guy like Keenan Allen potentially be a bad tiers play because he's more of a floor guy every week, but I see him more as a floor guy, not exactly a big weak guy like his teammate Mike Williams would be.
That's a great point, and that's a great example. And honestly, sometimes they may be in the same tier. And that is an interesting point. A guy like Keenan Allen probably not going to sink you because of his floor, but is he going to get that ceiling play? And the question is really, this is where the nuances of tiers come in, is really like, do you think the other guys in that tier have a very high percent chance to hit a ceiling way above Keenan Allen? Because honestly, like if you have, 1 or 2 tiers where you're only a couple points off what the highest scoring was, let's just make up some numbers just for points of reference here. So say Keenan Allen gets 18 points, but say the highest player in that same tier with Keenan Allen only ends up getting 20. Well, you probably are fine with Keenan Allen, actually, if you found, some big ceiling plays other places. So again, yes, of course you want to hit the nuts and hit the, the highest scoring guy in each tier. But I've seen a ton of winning lineups where, that is obviously hard to do, to get 8 out of 8 of hitting the highest scoring guy. That's the goal. But, if that doesn't happen, if you are kind of putting yourself in a position where you're just like getting maybe that next guy or right behind or not too many points off, that's okay too. So my answer to that question would be, it really depends on if you think the guys in the same tier as Keenan Allen have a much higher percent chance to hit a much higher ceiling, then yes, I would play somebody else other than Keenan Allen. But if you think Keenan Allen, still has a ceiling potential, because that still is in his range of outcomes, and you think, maybe he still is going to finish in that range of points, like let's say within like 2 to 4 points, then I don't mind putting Keenan Allen in the player pool.
Do matchups matter? Because you think week 1 this year we've got Kansas City, Arizona, Green Bay, Minnesota,
right?
Las Vegas, Raiders, Chargers. Those games have got higher score games than like Jacksonville, Washington. But
right.
are you more apt to playing guys in high scoring games because you think, well, let's just say the 3 tier 1 quarterbacks, or the 4 tier 1 quarterbacks are Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, and Justin Herbert. Well, they're all 4 in high scoring games. So right. Which one would you be more apt to using?
Earlier on my strategy, and I'm still working on, I'm gathering some data. And actually this week I will be releasing a data article, and hopefully next week a show about tiers data that'll kind of like the data from last year, that is. So from the 2021 season, this is some data I gathered, and this is kind of what I gleaned from that data that I can see as different edges. So I will have that for you guys soon on the FanSpeak network and on fanspeak.com. But to answer your question, in the earlier tiers, I don't worry about ownership as much, again, because it gets condensed anyway. So, I'll take the guy that I really do think has the highest ceiling. And again, a lot of those are in the high scoring games. So I'm not going to try to get cute. If you're in a later tier though, where there are some high total games, that's where I may try to look to get an edge on ownership and pick a guy who may be lower owned because he's in a lower owned or lower total game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because you get away from the chalk because everybody's going to use the guys with the 53, 54 point game potential.
Exactly. And you don't have to do that across the board. Like, again, you don't have to be contrarian across the board, but you don't want to obviously be chalky across the board. So I like to think from the data I've pulled so far, one of the things I've learned is if you can get unique in just like two tiers, I think on the top 1% of lineups, we're able to get sub 15% ownership on players in 1.8 tiers. So basically 2 tiers. You can get sub 15% ownership in just 2 tiers. That's enough to kind of differentiate yourself, honestly. So that's why I'd say, to your point, I'd probably go with Mahomes or Kyler in that tier 1 in the highest total game. I mean, I love Justin Herbert. I love all the guys you mentioned, but I would not be afraid to eat chalk in that first tier. But then lower, like in tier 6, 7, 8, that may be where I'd say, oh, well, there's still some guys from these high total games, but this is where I might take some guys from a lower total game because they might be lower on. So.
How much do you use for what projections do you use, not just for ownership, but for scoring? Because we've seen like everybody use projections, whether it be established or on fantasy, also now Stochastic. But there are so many different projections, it can confuse you know what out of you. So what projections do you use?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good ones out there. Honestly, I've used a lot of the ones you've mentioned in the past, but I use Run the Sims. They are a new tool site that started last year. They have they base everything on running simulations for games like 10,000 times. And I know the guy, Justin Freeman, is an excellent Showdown player and DFS player. And he's kind of the brains behind that. And Run the Sims is in its second year. And yeah, I use their projections. And the thing I like about Run the Sims is you can change the projections. They're customizable. So if there's a game that you don't agree with what he projected, you can change the projections to, based on what you think is going to happen. So I like that.
So if like Kyler Murray's projected for 15 fantasy points, but you think, well, wait a minute, it's a high scoring game,
right?
I might bump that up a few.
Sure. Yeah, you can bump up even all the things that will translate to the fantasy points. Like, well, I think he's going to throw more times. I think he's going to have a higher completion percentage. And then I think he might run a little more. Then that'll bump up his fantasy points and the projection. Yes, absolutely.
How many lineups do you usually make? Because how many lineups do you usually make? Tier lineups do you make?
Yeah, I make about 20. I'm not a mass multi-enter person. Never have been. Obviously, first of all, you'd have to hand build 150 tiers lineups because there aren't there are so many optimizers and simulators for Classic and Showdown to, kind of put in your projections, put in your inputs and spit out 150 lineups. There isn't that, really for tiers, number one. Number two, I just always have been a hand builder. I've been playing for 9 years now. I enjoy that. I enjoy having all the control with that. So we actually have a tiers simulator on fanspeak.com where it's like I plug in my projection or my favorite plays. And then it kind of just gives you suggestions, but that's more of like you can use these as suggestions and make tweaks from here. Oh, I like what this spit out for tiers 1 through 6, but I'm not sure about tier 7 and 8. So I'm going to change it to, these 2 players or something like that. So it's more to just get you started on the tiers format and play around with the tiers simulator to then, make your own tweaks, or maybe you will find some lineups you like in there. But I'm a hand builder. So I do about 20 to 25.
So tell us about one of your biggest tier wins because I'm intrigued on your strategy used for this lineup.
Sure. So, I mean, I haven't, taken down a tiers tournament yet. So that's the goal this year. I will say this year, my biggest heartbreak was I did, rather well in the Flea Flickers, their big tournament, the tournament with the highest money up top. I think their top prize is usually around 20,000 to first. I had a lineup where I pretty much had a lot of the high scoring guys, and my lineup matched identically to the third place lineup. So I wouldn't have won it, but it matched identically to the third place lineup, but a 1v1. I believe I played in tier 4, I played Cordell Patterson, and at 3 or 4% owned, Terry McLaurin outscored him by 20 points. And Terry McLaurin is my favorite player in the NFL because I'm a Washington fan. So that was like double heartbreak because it's like that's a 1v1. It was a 1v1 and there's an ownership, example. Like, again, a lot of the ownership edges you find more common later in tiers, again, because I explained there's more guys. Nobody wanted to play Terry McLaurin in tier 4. And I think that was the week they played the Falcons and he scored 2 touchdowns and had 30 fancy points or something in that range. And he just outscored, that tier by a lot. And he was so low owned. So, you needed him. And, he's the guy that I play probably too much considering the offense he's in. And that was a heartbreak. But no, I've had some, top 10, top 15 finishes, that have been fun sweats, where I'm thinking, oh, I've got a chance, and then it hasn't quite got there. So I've definitely had some top 10, top 15 finishes, and then that big old 1v1 heartbreak. But I'm still searching to take down the tiers tournament, and that's the goal this season.
Well, hey, Terry McLaurin feels like he'd be a great best ball or tiers player because, he might score 3 touchdowns.
Right. Hey, people want to kind of give Carson Wentz a hard time, rag on Carson Wentz. I get it. It's been a rough couple years for him, or let's say a roller coaster for Carson Wentz. But listen, as a Washington fan, let me assure you, because I watch all the games, Carson Wentz is the best quarterback that Terry McLaurin has ever played. Since we have drafted Terry McLaurin, he has been through quarterback after quarterback after quarterback who, the arm strength, the accuracy, whatever that is, they're not getting him the ball like they should. And I guarantee you, this is the best quarterback that Terry has ever played with. So I'm interested to see what that will do. Whatever your feelings on Wentz are, I guarantee this is an upgrade for McLaurin.
So if you look at the week 1 slate in general, obviously the slate, a lot of the Showdown and DFS and tiers contents aren't out yet, but what stacks, but everybody's mentioned like stacks, whether it be for best ball, classic, Showdown, but will you potentially stack 2 players, potentially Mahomes and Travis Kelce, or Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown together?
Yes, that's a great question. And that'll be in the tiers data that I have an article this week and hopefully a show next week. What I've found in the top 1% of lineups so far is that stacks that you get an edge by stacking at least one of your quarterbacks, but you don't have to force 2. Then right after that, maybe stacking your second quarterback, because again, you're always going to have 2 quarterbacks in tiers, one in the first tier, one in the 5th tier. So it is, I think, very plus EV and smart to stack at least one of your quarterbacks. Don't force the second stack, but if it naturally happens and you see like the ceiling play combo there for the second stack, then that is right behind there on top 1% lineups. But doing, trying to overstack and, stack like multiple players with each guy, that is where you start to lose a little leverage, or not stacking at all. So again, I think it's right to stack, but I think you also have to ask who's in that tier with the players, number one. And number two, what type of quarterback is it? Is it a condensed, receiving core, or is it an offense that's really spread out? If it's like the Vikings, where it's Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, then you could definitely stack Kirk with Jefferson or Thielen, or maybe even if you want to get a little wild, you could stack them with both. But if it's an offense that's way more spread out, like the Bills, you don't have to feel like you have to force a stack with Josh Allen. A, he gets a lot, obviously he can get a lot on the ground. And B, sometimes, his touchdowns or his, the way he disperses it to his receivers are very spread out. Now, obviously there are times like the Chiefs playoffs game where you obviously had, if you were doing tiers in the playoffs, you had to stack him with Gabe Davis that day, So, obviously it's situationally dependent, but I'm just saying there are some more condensed offenses that you definitely want to stack. There are some offenses that are more spread out that you don't feel like you have to force a stack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially with these running quarterbacks, because a guy like Jalen Hurts could annoy you, because
Right.
if you try and stack Jalen Hurts with like AJ Brown or Devontae Smith, they might go, Jalen Hurts might put up 20, but Devontae Smith might put up 3 for 20.
Right. You're exactly right. It was,
And then Lamar gets like 120 yards on the ground, and Bateman and Mark Andrews are wondering, where's the ball at? Where's the ball? Where's the ball?
Right. I believe Mark Andrews, actually, when he was going nuts last season, was actually when Lamar Jackson was out, was when his highest games, so you do have to be careful about that. Sometimes with the rushing quarterbacks, that, those are the ones too, where you don't need to force a stack, because they may get there, more like a combination of the ground and the air, where a guy like Kirk Cousins, he's not getting it on the ground. So, if he's getting there, that means if Kirk Cousins, let's say he'd be in like a tier 5, if he gets there and he is the quarterback that you want in tier 5, you're going to want Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen most likely. But again, you also have to look who's in that tier, right? So like Justin Jefferson's probably going to be in tier 2, like the highest tier 2, or maybe tier 3. So like he's going to be with other studs. So if he's, just because you like Kirk Cousins and you like Justin Jefferson, you just always have to consider like, okay, but who else is in that tier? Like, do I see the, how would I rank the ceiling potential for these guys? And so that's what I mean about not forcing stack. And again, data show that it is good to stack at least one of your quarterbacks for sure. But just, it's not like every lineup, both quarterbacks have to be stacked, I guess would be the easiest way to say
that. So stacking, yes, but not double stacking potentially.
Correct. Exactly. You got it.
So what do you think? So getting away from the tier segment for just a minute, because I figured it'd be funny, because you're actually a Washington Commanders fan. I'm a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. And guess who plays each other week 1?
Week 1. That's right. I mean, I obviously think I am a hopeful, hopefully delusionally optimistic Washington fan every year. So, I'm at my most optimistic point. Can only go down from here for me. So yeah, I like our chances, but I do think the Jaguars are going to be improved this year. Another year. Lawrence has another year. He's getting ETN back. Got Christian Kirk. There's a lot to like there.
And plus, we actually have a head coach instead of that turd last year.
That's a big one too.
Yeah, a guy that Washington fans will be used to seeing on the visiting sideline with Doug Peterson there. So
that's right.
So I'm thinking we should have a week one head-to-head tiers contest. What do you think about that?
That's fine. Let's set it up. I say let's go for it.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. I can't wait for that.
Okay. I know. I can't wait. Usually I know I was itching last year for them to really, DraftKings slowly releases more tournaments and then showdowns and then tiers is usually the last one they release. And so you gotta stay patient, but they'll release it, but it probably won't be until like right around like early September, which is a bummer because I would love to just start pouring over it now.
Yeah, and just figure out which guys I want, right?
Exactly. But no, a week one head-to-head tier sounds great.
All right. So thanks for hopping on, Tears Go. We wish you well. Hopefully your tears will be tears of joy after winning a big DPP.
I like the good pun.